This video might become quite controversial among a fair share of Spider-Man video game fans. In our journey of ranking all Spider-Man titles with the help of my Stasocritic scoring system, details of which are in the pinned comment, we have reached the era of games based on the Spider-Man 2 movie. There's quite a lot of them, and there is a particular Spider-Man 2 title that's incredibly iconic in the gaming world. It is pretty consistently put in top 3 Spider-Man games, and what I will say about it might not necessarily be something you'd expect. But we'll get to that. First, we'll start with a different Spider-Man 2 game and a personal story. If you've watched my other videos, you know that the early 2000s is when I became a huge Spider-Man fan. Now, imagine the reaction of my 12-year-old self when I saw the E3 2003 presentation of Spider-Man 2 and that it was going to be an open-world game where your webs actually attached to buildings while swinging. I was amazed and I couldn't wait for the game. Then at E3 2004, I saw the gameplay trailer and my hype just went through the roof. I wanted that game. I needed that game. And when it was finally released and I saw how many people online praised it, I had to buy it. But stores in our city didn't have it yet. I convinced my mom to take me to the capital where the choice of discs was better. In one of the stores I saw the CD. Screens on the back were small, but there was Spider-Man swinging on webs that looked like they were attaching to buildings. That's all I needed to know. My mom asked if I'm sure that's the game I want. Of course I said yes. I kept the disc box in my hands throughout the whole 2-hour ride back to our home city. I couldn't wait to put it in our PC's DVD drive. Yeah, we didn't have a PS2 or Xbox or any of the home consoles. Moldova is an Eastern European country and therefore it was mostly focused on PCs. I installed the game with anticipation. And then I saw this. I couldn't understand why the game was about clicking on web icons in the air. This is absolutely not what I saw in trailers. This is not what people were talking about online either. Eventually, after some digging, I found out that the PC version is an entirely different game, not a port from consoles like the previous titles. Now, obviously I kept playing the game anyway, sort of falling into Stockholm Syndrome. I wanted to play Spider-Man 2 so much. Not this Spider-Man 2, but there wasn't any other Spider-Man 2 I could play. In an attempt to somehow have a game where I would swing from building to building, I actually was avoiding swing icons and used to web zip from wall to wall. That's how desperate I was for the console Spider-Man 2 experience. Returning to the game now as a professional game designer, I understand that the team at Fizz Factor was most likely contacted at the last possible moment to make something for PC, so I do not blame them for this. More than that, despite the extreme disappointment during my childhood, I really cannot say that this is an outright shitty game. Simplistic? Incredibly so. Story adaptation is haphazard and often illogical? Sure. Not looking great? For the most part, everything is very awkward to say the least. The moment where Aunt May was kidnapped is particularly hilarious.
Come on, lady, you're riding with us.
Help, Spider-Man!
I'll have to catch up with Hawk later. Can't let them take Aunt May.
But this game tries to be creative within the extent of its mechanics. There is actually some really nice ideas, for example the Mysterio encounter outright transforming the city into this weird set of floating islands. And it doesn't work like crap either. It's barely possible to play normally so many of the older Spider-Man games because of really clunky controls, while this one plays just fine. Sure, most of your actions are done with the left mouse click, but the game attempts to have variety and provide a reasonable pacing while putting some secrets for exploration purposes. Look, I could make fun of stuff like Simon Says bank vaults, but quite frankly that would be dishonest on my part. Spider-Man 2 for PC might not do anything particularly great, but when looking at this game based on its own merits, without comparing it to the console version, this is far from the worst Spider-Man game released. I'm going to assign a Stasocritic rating of 36. Yes, the game is still disappointing, but there is also some simplistic enjoyment that can be found in it. With my only Spider-Man 2 experience being the PC version, Treyarch's console adaptation became a title that I literally dreamed of playing. But other Spider-Man games came and went, so in the end this one sort of always remained in the backlog. But now with me working on this video series, 19 years later, I finally had a reason to properly play Spider-Man 2. I was particularly excited because of all the praise I still keep hearing about its swinging system, how many features it's got, how creative you can be, and how much control you have. In a way, launching the game up, I felt like my 13-year-old self again. And I have to fully admit that 13-year-old me probably would have been ecstatic about the game. The current me was somewhat underwhelmed. But let's take everything in order. Spider-Man 2 has a combat system that people in our days would compare to Arkham Asylum. There is a big focus on dodging and counterattacks, as well as performing a number of various combos, the amount of which only increases as you progress. You're also encouraged to take enemies into the air and juggle them through air combos. When it works, it's very fun. However, it doesn't always work. The actions are performed with a sort of delay, sometimes the chain of your inputs is not properly recognized, dodging works inconsistently, all this makes the combat experience pretty clunky. Even more so in the late game thanks to criminals becoming very adept at blocking your hits and dodging your webs, even when you're in the slow motion spider reflex mode that increases your damage. Heck, these people are more dangerous than some of the bosses, which in turn are very underwhelming due to regrettably basic combat designs.
Yeah, no more messing around.
I'm gonna have to take away your credit card.
No more Mr. Nice Guy.
Is that a horn on your head, or are you just glad to see me?
Maybe I
The city randomly generates tons of crimes and citizens in need of assistance, some just happen in the world and some have to be activated through awkward dialogue. But in the end there is not enough event types, and since most of them boil down to combat, eventually you think twice before heading towards police for help. The game has spread throughout Manhattan hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of little collectible tokens, and I wouldn't call searching for difficult-to-see little icons with practically zero reward besides a checkmark to be an engaging process. The main missions are also pretty repetitive. There are some standout ones for sure, but even the most original levels hinge more on an interesting premise rather than actual gameplay engagement. In general, most tasks involve beating a group of thugs up, going from point A to point B, or following a Black Cat, and yeah, the latter is a very regular thing you're going to do. Black Cat is a very prominent character in the story, and there is a couple things that I appreciate about the way Spider-Man 2 handles its narrative. First, like in the game before it, it doesn't try to recreate word for word the plot of the film. For example, in the movie the dilemma was if Peter Parker should abandon the life of Spider-Man, but here in the game, through Black Cat, the dilemma is if Spider-Man should abandon the life of Peter Parker. And that's a pretty smart decision that still keeps the narrative core around the same thread while meeting the needs of the game. The story itself is also told in a much more coherent manner than in the previous title. Yeah, sure, sometimes there are still some leaps of logic happening, and the way some of the additional villains are introduced to the game is awkward, but it's got proper storytelling structure. If only the movie actors reprising the roles would have had any enjoyment actually voicing their characters. If in the previous game Toby had a dry style of delivery that was still fine, in this game it feels like he is just really bored.
This may not be art, but I like it. Okay, I'll bite. How did the fishbowl get stuck on your head?
Doesn't help that to accommodate the very impressive on a technical level open world and swimming system, the quality of animations, environments, lip sync, everything takes a hit. Even the design of the sound and music systems can feel sort of lacking. The soundscape is often pretty barren, even though the quality of the sounds and music themselves is great.
You. I can't believe those crooks. I just ordered my gigantesco latte and they burst in. I didn't get to finish it, I didn't get to start it.
Yo, anybody moves and they'll regret it. Oh no.
All this is wrapped in a structure that really tries to stretch the game's limited amount of main content by forcing you to collect a number of hero points each chapter before progressing, and most of these hero points are received through side activities. They can be used to purchase various new abilities in the comic book shop. It all feels somewhat artificial, though the comic book shop wrapper is cute. So to summarize, Spider-Man 2 has a solid direction, but pretty much every facet is clunky, flawed, or lacking in certain ways. But one might say that all that is not the point of the game, since it will still be special due to the web swinging mechanics and the whopping 150 races alongside pizza deliveries that utilize the system to the max. And this is where I have to disagree, for the most part at least. While the Spider-Man 2 web swinging is a tremendous technical innovation, I do not think it is that great to play. Or rather, it's not great to play in the circumstances where you need to actually do something. Because if you're just swinging around New York without worrying much where to go other than the general direction, the system is exhilarating. You can get to incredibly high speeds, jump from building to building, wall run all over the place, use two webs if you want and launch yourself as a catapult or swing from lampposts. There's many ways to express yourself. But you know what is one of the most hated sounds by all Spider-Man 2 players everywhere? This. Catching the balloon is a seemingly very little task, but it's one that requires precision. And the more precision you need in the game, the worse Spider-Man 2 navigation system becomes. The problem revolves around your inputs being more of a suggestion, if anything. Here is a very concrete example. If in the same set of circumstances you're going to activate WebZip while pushing the stick forward, at times Spider-Man will WebZip towards the building to the right that's closer, sometimes he will WebZip towards the trees to the left which are farther away, and sometimes he just won't do anything and you have to keep activating WebZip until he finds something. And if let's say you push the stick diagonally to the right to make sure he chooses the building, Spidey in this case can decide to WebZip to a point even farther to the right, and that's still not what you need. This also applies to standard web swinging. You never really know if Spider-Man is going to shoot out a short web that will send you into a loop, or one so long that you will lose your momentum by running onto the ground, or anywhere in between. And it's not like a total control of where your web sticks is possible or even needed, but there is barely any ability to control what happens after the web connects. You can shift yourself mid-swing only by a bit, bigger jumps are something that can be done only through charging beforehand, and by the way, sometimes it's enough to sprint only a little for Spidey to jump far forward, and sometimes he jumps up anyway, costing precious time in a race. Mid-air control is also relatively limited. If you want to wall run up, you have to make sure the wall run is activated on an upwards motion, because if your arc points down even a little bit, Spidey will run down, potentially ruining your plans, and as a result of all this, you will keep bumping a lot. Oh, and the camera keeps trying to recenter itself in weird ways, which is especially annoying in cases where you need to run and jump up a building wall. And those creative moves like double webs, catapults, swinging from flagpoles? Yeah, they basically stop your momentum entirely, so if you need to reach a goal fast in a race, it's better to not do that unless the mission specifically requires you to. After a while, you realize that to master the system and gain some degree of consistency while going fast, you have to try and minimize the amount you spend actually swinging. Attach the web only for a very short time, thus resetting your boost so you could speed yourself up as often as possible. This will allow you to decrease the randomness and help with keeping a straight path. And even then, sometimes while you do that, Spidey attaches to something which will send you flying in an absolutely different direction. I learned this technique while trying to complete races for their second stage of record time, the Mega Time. And I was doing quite a lot of these because I made it my goal to make sure I fully understood the system. Besides, with how many races there are, they are essentially the actual meat of the game. But what bothered me while going for these mega times is that me reaching that threshold often felt like a result of getting lucky with the game not messing up what I was doing, rather than the consequences of me getting better, because similar actions and timings often led to widely different results, and that's just not how skill mastery is supposed to work. I'm sure with time, if I would keep practicing the aforementioned tactic of keeping my speed as high as possible, while doing as few swinging arcs as possible, and avoid any fancy tricks that remove your momentum, I would manage to become more consistent and more often turn luck to my side and be able to fix situations when the game decides to do something wild. But to me, all this goes against what I find enjoyable in mastering game mechanics. And while freeform roaming around the city is an absolute blast, that aspect alone is not what defines the overall quality of the game and my personal enjoyment in particular. So this is where we get to the controversial part of the video. I will assign a Stasocritic rating of 57. Far from the top or close to top position Spider-Man 2 usually gets in these rankings. The game has an incredibly innovative and technically impressive swinging system that feels absolutely amazing when you want to just fly around the city. Spider-Man 2 is incredibly important to the franchise history because it has essentially set up the foundation that will be followed by so many other Spider-Man games in the future. But that being said, the game itself is far from ideal in any of its aspects. Combat, mission design, exploration, structure, and even the web swinging itself. But for what it's worth, they do have a well-defined core. If someone from Vicarious Visions, currently known as Blizzard Albany, is watching me, I am really sorry, but this is going to be another title with good ideas and interesting direction that I'm going to criticize for poor implementation. So, remember what I said about the previous handheld titles from the studio: Spider-Man for Game Boy Color and Mysterious Menace for Game Boy Advance. Now apply all that to the DS Spider-Man 2 game, only now in 3D with confusing 2.5D levels, where you have to find all instances of whatever is the goal, be it hostages or robots or electrical panels, somewhat unresponsive controls, and an uncomfortable system of choosing your special move through the touchscreen buttons in the center. Oh, and this is a DS title, so of course there are some awkward gimmicky touchscreen minigames, mostly during boss battles. The game is going to get a Stasocritic rating of 32. It has the potential to be a fun platformer, but the implementation of it all transforms it into a pretty disappointing experience. Now, the sequel to the previous Spider-Man Game Boy Advance title by Digital Eclipse, on the other hand, is a pretty considerable improvement over its predecessor, with caveats. The game can be somewhat problematic. Hit detection is wonky, very often enemies can't be damaged if you punch them during their staggered animation, your attacks can't be cancelled, and that's a problem considering some of the attack animations can be pretty long. Action detection can be flawed as well. For example, instead of picking up a barrel, Spider-Man can destroy it. It's a game with pretty clunky mechanics, which in a way is surprising in comparison to the relative polish of the previous title. So Spider-Man 2 not only doesn't fix the gameplay issues from that game, it adds more. Does it help that the beginning is not particularly great, with you having to roam around a labyrinthine level trying to find people to deliver pizza to in 7 minutes? All the aforementioned gameplay issues sadly don't go away. It's something you will have to deal with the entire game. That being said, unlike many other Spider-Man titles, including the recently discussed Nintendo DS version, Spider-Man 2 for GBA is worth experiencing if you manage to get used to or look past its problems. For one, the level design and pacing are actually pretty good. There is enough variety to keep things interesting both in terms of mission objectives. It's not a chain of one-typed goals where you have to find a set of objects and haphazardly put levels like it was in the previous GBA game. And within the levels themselves, there is a bigger amount of elements that make things more engaging, even if they can feel a bit funny in terms of contextualization. For example, there is a bank level with what seems to be some exceptionally strong air conditioners. But hey, it creates interesting gameplay situations, so can't complain there. Bosses are also more interesting, each trying to provide a specific experience unique to them. But the most intriguing aspect of the game to me personally is the attempt to create an open-world experience on a GBA. The previous game had 3D swinging bonus levels. Spider-Man 2 reutilizes that technology to make a fully open city where you go from mission to mission by swinging through it. In these segments, the environments look sort of horrible, the city feels dead with you being the only resident in it, and there is barely anything to do other than just go towards the mission icon, but I'll be damned if I won't admit that I'm impressed by the ambition. And there's just some magic in seeing this kind of gameplay on your little Game Boy Advance screen. All in all, Spider-Man 2 for GBA gets a Metacritic rating of 52. It's one of those games I wish I could have rated higher, but its issues are difficult to ignore and are often quite frustrating. Still, if you have enough tolerance for gameplay clunkiness, Spider-Man 2 can be worth a try. The N-Gage, one of those flops that has utterly failed simply because it was a wonderful concept too ahead of its time. Still, there is a Spider-Man 2 game made for it by Digital Eclipse, and the first few couple levels bear a very suspicious resemblance to the first several levels of their first GBA Spider-Man movie game, not to mention the mechanics and UI. Differences start to crop up later on with actually new level content and a different way of doing the swinging segments between some levels. Now it's in full 3D. Still, I wouldn't call the adaptation of the source game to be successful. Similarly to the GBA Spider-Man 2, the core mechanics are much clunkier and less enjoyable, but unlike the GBA Spider-Man 2, there is no levels or progression that make it worth going through the clunkiness. The story also makes absolutely zero sense, and it saddens me that due to N-Gage not being popular, this game's still frame cutscenes did not get used for meme material. They are so deliciously ridiculous. I mean... Still, this doesn't save the N-Gage Spider-Man 2 version from getting a Metacritic rating of 34. Yeah, there are many Spider-Man games that are far worse, but also, this one wouldn't make getting an N-Gage worth it. Developed by Aw Games, this is a collection of mini-games for very small children. And as far as activity centers go, it's far from the worst one I have seen, but also it's not exactly tight. I fully understand and approve the usage of only the mouse, but some mini-games like the wall-crawling one and Metal Gear Spidey have you move the character by just moving the cursor, without clicking, and even I had troubles with coordinating that kind of navigation. Some of the minigames also feel a bit weird in terms of thematic, for example the one where you have to match a mugshot based on witness testimony. Not something you'd expect Spider-Man to do. But at any rate, this minigame collection is sort of adequate for what it is, I guess. I will assign a Metacritic rating of 40. It's okay-ish, but it's definitely a product of its time. Not only does this game help with my case of not all Java-based titles being bad, it's also been developed by Vicarious Visions, and they finally can stop feeling horrible for putting their Spider-Man games down. Spider-Man vs. Doc Ock is essentially a collection of 3 minigames that you repeat over and over again, with increasing difficulty and changes in the environment through time of day. The controls are tight and responsive, though the difficulty can get pretty crazy in the later stages. Still, with its short but satisfying gameplay loop, catchy music that's similar to the 90s show theme, and quite smooth animations, this is a pretty good arcade game, perfect for playing on your phone for a few minutes while you're waiting for something. The reason it gets a Static rating of 52 mainly comes from me personally not being particularly engaged with it, so I think it's just alright. But if it's your jam and you're a Spider-Man fan, there are ways to get this game working even on a modern phone, so you can tackle the arcade challenge from time to time. This is also a mobile phone collection of Spider-Man 2 based minigames, only in full 3D. There is not much else to say other than the fact that the game being developed for Brew and not Java made it particularly difficult to preserve and to actually find a way to play it in modern times. It will get a Static rating of 51. You can have some fun with these, and I'm glad that it's saved for historical purposes, but also it's probably best to seek out this minigame collection only if you're a huge Spider-Man fan that would want to try it out. Otherwise, it's fine, but really, nothing special. This is a mobile pinball game with a Spider-Man skin on it. I mean, it's literally a skin. The title is based off trans pinball that was adapting franchises like Space Invaders and Arkanoid into a pinball game. With that knowledge, it makes sense why there's some weird flying spiders in one of the stages. There's not much you can say about this particular game though. It's pinball. It can be addicting because the core loop of a pinball game is pretty engaging. However, I must say that the physics in this version feel a bit off, and the tables are not interesting enough to balance that out. So, Spider-Man 2 Pinball gets a Static rating of 45. It's a perfectly fine time waster for mobile phones, but there's no particular reason to seek this game out. One of the launch titles for PlayStation Portable was the Spider-Man 2 game developed by Vicarious Visions. And if it looks to you suspiciously similar to the Spider-Man the movie game from 2002, well, it's because it is essentially a direct sequel to that. And it clearly had a very short development timeline, because there's music and level environments that were literally reused from the first Spider-Man game, and quite a number of noticeable bugs, though I haven't encountered anything game-breaking. Still, this is a game where there are skills that are supposedly purchased for XP points, but they are actually unlocked from the very beginning. Definite signs of a fast development pipeline. Not to mention things like some enemies having quite ridiculous visual designs, especially the eye patch pirate thugs, the story being a poorly connected sequence of events that only vaguely make sense on a broad level, and I would guess the development team didn't have the possibility to hire Alfred Molina for new voice lines, so they had to reuse what they could from previous games, and it doesn't feel like it always fits.
You're becoming very troublesome.
Also, while the gameplay graphics are fine, the pre-rendered cutscenes can look very weird. And why does Peter just take off his mask for no reason here? Anyway, you might think that I'm getting back to being disappointed by Spider-Man game developed by Vicarious Visions, that I just can't give the team there a break. But not this time. This time, there's a plot twist. Spider-Man 2 for PSP, despite its problems and clearly rushed development cycle, is the Spider-Man 2 game I had the most fun with. It's not nearly as innovative as the console version, but also for me personally, it wasn't nearly as frustrating. Yes, Spider-Man attaches his webs to thin air and flies like a drone, but at least I can have proper control and not rely on luck. There's far less combos than even in the first Spider-Man movie game, let alone the second one, where the controls are consistent and more responsive. Each combo has a different purpose, and I can actually get enjoyment from being able to air juggle enemies consistently. Each level is not particularly big, but the various situations and goals are pretty varied, and every time there's something new. Saving hostages from a museum with robotic knights and mummies, disarming bombs, escaping bank security through vents, there's even a side-scrolling level on a train. And bosses are far more enjoyable as well. I mean, remember this Rhino fight from the console version. And here in the PSP version, it's a double fight with Shocker, where you have to make Shocker's blasts hit the Rhino, and then have the Rhino destroy columns holding the platform Shocker is standing on. Or the Mysterio fight, and I'll admit that the Quentin Beck character is much better in the console version, and the final encounter with Mysterio is exceptionally memorable there, but I had far more engagement with this more traditional Mysterio boss fight. Vulture has been a practically total copy from the first Spider-Man game with a couple additions and environment changes, but also the fight from that game was fun, so yeah. And sure, the game is so short that if you start playing it as you turn on the Spider-Man 2 movie, the credits are likely to start at the same time in both the game and the film. I can totally see why Spider-Man 2 for PSP might not be everyone's cup of tea, and why back in the day it could be seen as a poor value proposition. But from my side, I will assign a Stasocritic rating of 61. It's an unassumingly fun game. Not as innovative as the console version and definitely not as important historically, but also less frustrating and more enjoyable for me. Another minigame collection developed for Brew, this one is impossible to play nowadays. At the moment of writing this, there has been no phones found from which the game could be ripped for preservation, and the only thing I could find is this screenshot. I'm not rating games that are impossible to play, but just acknowledging them. Of course, there are chances for this to become playable again, and I will rate it then, but until further notice, rest in peace, Spider-Man New York Subway. Another mobile game that at the moment is impossible to play, however there is at least actual gameplay footage of it that can be found online. The few reviews that I have seen seem to have been pretty positive. It's a platformer that shows promise. So hopefully this title will get dug up one day. Until then, rest in peace, the hero returns. This video has had 12 whooping entries, but I really didn't want to separate the Spider-Man 2 era into different chapters. There are actually 2 titles that should be a part of this era which I didn't put in the list. A Lipster educational game called Case of the Sinister Speller, and a PC Kids game called Spider-Man and Friends. For the first one I don't have a Lipster device, and for the second I couldn't find a way to purchase the CD. And as technically these games are not lost to time, there is no reason for an RIP entry. I'll discuss them in later videos if I ever get a chance to play them. But back to the topic at hand. To me, the Spider-Man 2 era largely shows an increase in quantity and decrease in quality. There are some fun and nice games for sure, and the console version of Spider-Man 2, once again, is incredibly important for the franchise's evolution historically speaking, but I haven't played anything from this era that would rival the 2000-2002 Spider-Man outings. The question is, will that trend continue? We shall find out in the next video.